All right, so thank you guys for watching this video. We're going to be going over everything related to HTML and CSS from a beginner standpoint. This is for our ACM 1 month event. So I'm just going to go through some basics on HTML and CSS, and we're actually going to do a walkthrough of a specific project that we will be continuing in our JavaScript workshop. So keep a lookout for that, but you will be able to follow through, and we're going to build the entire front end like GUI for our calculator project. So we're going to create a cost of attendance calculator for UAH. There will be some slight variation in the actual calculated cost, but this is mostly just to kind of get an idea of how to make a website. So before we do that, I'm going to go over a little bit on how to use this site. This HTML and CSS website is linked in our 1 month resources channel, so you can go over there and find it. And you're going to really need it to be able to work on the workshop. So first off, how to use this site. Just a little brief introduction that this is not a project that you can claim as your own. All of the code is already written, and we will just be copying and pasting into VS Code for the sake of explaining what each part does to build this. So you cannot claim this as your own. This is just a learning tool. However, if you do participate in 1 month and you create your own project, then you are more than welcome to put that on a resume. So now that we're going to get set up, we're going to see that there's a couple important folders and files that we need to set up in our project directory to get started. So I'm going to slide over to my VS Code, and over on the side in the Explorer, yours might look a little different since I'm on Mac, but it should be generally the same idea. It's going to tell me to open a folder. And I'm actually going to make a new folder and just call it 1 month workshop. And inside of that, I'm going to click, and yes, I'm going to trust the authors. So now you can see I'm in the 1 month workshop folder when I go over here to Explorer. So what we said we're going to need is we're going to have to click here, right click, new folder, and we're going to make an assets folder. And then we're going to make 3 new files. You can click on this button or you can right click to make a new file. We're going to have a functions.js. We're going to have a style.css, and of course an index.html. And you can see it already put JS, it put this little icon for HTML, and then an icon for CSS, so it recognizes what languages we're using. And these languages should by default be recognized by VS Code. You don't need any extension. So we're going to go ahead and close all of these except for index.html. And this is where we're going to be doing most of our work. We're going to work in our index.html as well as our style.css. So stay on that index.html for now. So as you can see, there's some more instructions here about what else you would need to do to use this website. Keep in mind that this is giving you all of the instructions, so I'm giving some instructions on how to use this website, which I'll go over as we're working it through the video. Optionally, if you don't have VS Code or you just don't want to work on your own machine, you're welcome to use this code sandbox that you can click the link to, and it will take you to a sandbox where you can work on the project. I've already pasted in the skeleton, which we'll do in a minute. You can access all the files here that we're going to need, and it's just a great opportunity if you don't want to use VS Code. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next section and just kind of go over what HTML is. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So note that this is not a programming language. Instead, HTML is a markup language, as it said, and it has tag elements. So because it's not a programming language, it is not compiled. Instead, your browser, I'm using Arc browser here, but Chrome, Edge, Firefox, all of those are built to interpret HTML. So that's how your code is quote unquote run. And like I said, it's made up of these building blocks called elements, which kind of you just paste and put into to make your website. So we're going to look at the basic HTML element structure, and I'm going to zoom in on this photo, and you can see that we have this syntax. So you can see that there is a start tag here that has this less than and greater than sign. And then there's an end tag here that looks exactly the same, except it has a slash. So this one is saying that this element is a button. And there's a lot of built-in HTML elements that we just use. Um, so that's what we're going to be doing. So this is a button that we're making. And notice that in this start tag, there is an attribute and a value. So any attributes are going to be put in the start tag. And here we have class equals some button value. We don't need to worry too much about what a class is. There are tons of different kinds of attributes, but this is just an example. And then you can see we have the content. So here it says click me. So if we were to actually go test it out, don't worry about what I'm doing right here. This is just to show you guys. But if we were to recreate that, we would have button, and we don't need any attributes right now. So we're going to just make that opening tag, click me for the content, and then the closing tag with that slash. And if I save that and run it, you can see that now there's a button here, and I can click on it, and it won't do anything right now, but now we've made that element. So that's how HTML works. It's just a bunch of these elements that you put in, and they will build your site. So now that we've covered the basic HTML element structure, just some common HTML elements, we're going to see a div element, which essentially acts as a section element. So it's like a container to hold other HTML elements. And in this case, we have the opening tag here, and then we have this closing tag at the bottom. So it's holding all of these elements inside of it. And then inside we can see this H1 with big title as the content, which is telling us that, oh, this is a big title. So H1 is the largest header that you can have. H2 is going to be the first subheader, so it's slightly smaller. And you can go all the way down to H6. So H3, H4, H5, all the way to H6, which will be the smallest subheader. And then we've got this P tag, which is our paragraph element. And you can just put in a paragraph of text. So here I've got this entire text here. And notice it doesn't have to be on the same line as long as it's contained within the opening and close tag. And then just for notes, this is going to be the comment syntax in HTML, which is a little tedious. You'll see that there's this opening structure with this exclamation point, and it kind of looks the same on the other side except no exclamation point. So now that we've done HTML, we'll do a quick little intro on what CSS is. So again, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So it is not a programming language, it's a style sheet language. And it's essentially designed to organize any styling like colors, layouts, and fonts. And you're just having this nice file that contains all of that information. So again, we're going to look at some structure here. And this is just an example. So notice here that we have the rule in this blue highlight, my CSS rule. And there's a selector that it's pointing to. In this case, it's a period. So it means we're talking about a class. So that was kind of going back to that HTML element with the class attribute. This is what it's referencing. So we're saying that any element that has that class, so in that case, that class was button, BTN. So if we had put dot BTN here, then all of the rules inside of this would apply. Any of the styling would apply to those elements that have this class name. And so inside we have these brackets, And we can see it's pretty straightforward. There's some property and some value. Here we're saying the background is going to be red. Color is referring to font color. It's going to be beige. And then our font size, 1.2 rem. We don't need to worry about the units here. That's not super important right now. But overall, this is what the CSS is going to look like. And then we can talk about a little bit of specificity. So when it comes to styling, there are a lot of different ways that you can apply styling. And depending on what method you use to apply that styling, there's going to be some sort of preference for what rules are going to apply first. So the first and most prevalent one is to do inline styling using a style attribute. So for an example, if we have div and then style equals some value, we can notice that we have this style attribute, and we can assign any kind of rules here, like background red, and those rules for the background to be red would be applied to this div element and anything inside of it, which we have nothing here. But this is going to take the most precedence. So after that, if we were to have, say, like div ID equals some ID, that would be our next level of specificity and preference to apply that rule. And we would define that inside of our CSS file. Instead of with a dot, the way we did here, we would use a hashtag and then the name of the ID, and then put all of the CSS inside. After that, you would have the class, which was literally this example right here. And we use that dot. And then the last one is an element. So in this case, we had a selector, but if we were not to put a selector and just say div or to say button, then we would say that that styling is applying to any element, any HTML element that is a button or a div or whatever the rule that we put here is. And that's going to be the least preference. So it's going to go through all of these styles first and apply those, and then anything here that's left over at the very end, it will apply. So if you're noticing that something isn't showing up, make sure that it is at a high enough priority so that it will appear. So that's kind of an intro to HTML and CSS. I've also provided a lot of resources here, including Codecademy. That's one of my personal favorites. And I've linked a couple of cheat sheets here, but there are also free courses where they can like walk you through how to work with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So those are a really great resource. So is W3 Schools. You can find just about anything related to web development on there. If you're just looking up a specific HTML element, like how do I make a button, it's going to have a nice, quick, and really clear to read page for you to access. And then I've also linked Bootstrap, which is a CSS library that's really great for beginners. And we will go a little bit into what Bootstrap is, and we're going to be using a lot of Bootstrap in a minute. So this is where that resource is. All right, so now that we're getting started, we're going to do some actual code. And I made a note here. We'll see it when we start running, but when you run your code on VS Code and click Run and Debug, make sure that you're always doing that from index.html. Don't try to debug from style.css or your JavaScript file. So we're not going to worry too much about that, but just when you're working on your own, make sure that that's where you're running it, or else it's going to look like something's not working. So now a little bit on how to use the site as we're going to be doing this. I've got these two desktops set up so I can switch, but here on the side we're going to have some code block, and it'll tell you the language up here, and in the comment or the caption it's going to tell us what file it goes in. So just as a reference, you can find that information there. And there's conveniently a copy button that will just copy all of the code for us with all of the proper spacing and indentation. So go ahead and copy this first section and go to your index.html file and just paste it in. And now that we've got that in there, go ahead and save that. And then here on the side of your VS Code, there's a Run and Debug button. Click on that, and then go ahead and click Run and Debug. And it's going to come up with this suggestion, and it's going to want it run in a web app, which makes sense because HTML is interpreted using a browser. So I prefer Chrome in this case, so I'm going to click on that. And notice it pulled up a browser with index.html, and this is just the file path for our file. So notice nothing came up right now, which is totally fine because we have nothing in there. But this is how we're going to run and debug our projects for reference. And notice how we did that from index.html, not when we were in style.css. So a little overview on what this code is. You can see that we have this doctype.html, and that's just defining the document as, hey, this is HTML, so when you're reading it, the browser's going to know that. The next thing we've got is this HTML tag, and the closing tag is down here. So everything inside of here is going to be HTML. That's all that that tag says. So everything you do in your website should be within these tags. And then the next section we have is head, and head just contains any metadata about the site. So in this case, we have a couple of imports for our styling, and we're going to add some more stuff in a minute. But it might include stuff like what is the title of the web page to know for the browser to put in the tab name. It might include some links to our own style sheets or our own JavaScript files, things like that. And then the real bulk of it, where all of the actual web page content is going to be inside of our body tag. And notice we have a class of main container. A lot of these here are going to have some sort of class name applied or an ID applied, and we're going to see how all of that makes sense when we start doing a little bit of the CSS and also when we start doing some JavaScript. So don't worry too much about that now. Whenever we are using it, I'll point it out. But just to know that all of the work is really going to go inside of body. We're going to put a couple things now in head just to get things set up. So if you scroll down to title and CSS metadata, go ahead and copy that section. And you can see that we have this title tag with cost of attendance calculator. So this is just saying that in the tab that's going to show up at the very top, we want the title to be cost of attendance calculator. Underneath it, we have this link. href is talking about what the URL or the link that we're linking to is. And in this case, we're linking to style.css, which is actually our file, style.css. And we're giving it this relationship of a style sheet. So we're saying, hey, we have a CSS file called style.css, and it is going to be providing our styles in the form of a style sheet. So we're going to copy this code, and then inside of our head, put a little bit of space and paste that in. And I'm just going to fix that indentation. So if I save this and I run, and note I have a button on my Mac that's running it, which is why I'm not clicking here. But we're going to go ahead and run it. And notice how now it says cost of attendance calculator at the top. That's what our title tag just did. And we're not going to see any styling show up yet because we also have nothing in our style.css, but we did make that linked. Moving on to the next section, we're going to go ahead and put just a little bit of information about the site. And what we're going to do, actually, you'll notice that there's this download here, and there is a file that we're going to want to download. So if you click on it, it's going to pull up this image of a calculator because we're making a calculator. And if you right click, you should be able to save as and save this wherever you'd like. So I'm just going to go here and make sure once you go to our 1 month workshop folder where we're working, notice we have this assets folder we made. Go ahead and click on that and then save it there. And one thing you're going to notice that I did wrong was I actually put these inside of the assets folder. So go ahead and correct this by taking these 3 and putting it outside. So I'm going to move those back to the 1 month workshop. So now I can close that assets folder and it should just have our image. So that's just a quick correction. Those need to be inside of the 1 month workshop folder, and then that picture goes inside of our assets. So now that we've downloaded that, go ahead and copy this next section with our title, image, and description. And inside of our index.html, we're going to be done with our head for now. So I can go ahead and minimize that using VS Code's like little collapsible feature. So then inside of body, I'm going to put a little bit of space and paste. And what we're going to see is we have one giant div. It's just class container, and that's going to cover this section. We have an image tag here. We give it a source, and this is pointing to our assets folder, specifically our calculator image here. So that's what the source of the image is. There's a couple other important attributes. There's going to be an alt attribute, which is just alternate text if the image can't load. A height, which says how big is our picture going to be. And then there's an ID, which is just a unique identifier for this HTML element. And we're going to see that that's going to be useful when we're doing our JavaScript so that we can reference this specific element for any kind of JavaScript we're doing. Underneath it, we have this H1 element, which we've already looked at. We've given it some inline styling. Don't worry too much about why there's this styling. There's a lot of styling I've already put into the code just for the sake of making it look nice right now, but just be aware that that's what it is. We've done the inline styling saying that the padding applied to it is going to be 20 pixels. And that title is just UAH cost of attendance calculator. And then underneath it, we have this paragraph tag and this whole paragraph on what the calculator does. So feel free to read through that and see what our calculator is going to be doing. So now that we've pasted that in, you save it. Make sure if this is here that it's matching the same file path as our actual image. So we'll go ahead and run it. And notice we have the image here, we have the title, and see it's been indented because it already has some padding applied, and then our paragraph. And one of the really cool tools you can do on pretty much any browser, you right click and inspect. It's going to pull up this like side developer tool. In this corner, there's going to be a select element to inspect it button. And then you can kind of hover over all of the elements. So notice here it's saying HTML, and it's giving like the color of the font, the size of the font, and all of that. This is the image, and it's giving our actual tag ID, so calculator image. Same here for the title. It's saying this is an H1. And notice how it says padding is 20 pixels. And you can see this green section. So if I click here and I go down at this bottom section and scroll, it pulls up this like weird box thing. So if I go to the center, this blue center is what the content of the H1 is. So it's highlighting that. Here it's got padding and it says 20, which was what we have, a padding of 20. This is where the border would be. In this case, we don't have a border for the element, but you could put that there. And then this is where margin would be. And there's a little bit of margin just from the way that the HTML is working right now, but we did not set any, so it's going to show up as empty right here. But this is really helpful if you're trying to figure out how to do some padding and spacing for stuff. It'll let you look at it while it's running. So now we've got that, I'm going to close this div and this paragraph. And we are not going to touch this anymore. We're going to leave this as it is. So if we scroll down, we're going to do just a little bit of styling for that section and then for the rest of the page. So go ahead and copy this code block, and notice now we're going to be in style.css. So let's go over to style.css and just paste. And the thing about the CSS is that it really doesn't matter what order you put all of these rules in, because as long as the rule is there, it will be applied. It'll find it. So notice here we have this title container with a display of flex. And essentially, this is saying that we are creating a flex box. There's a guide here that I've linked that has everything you would want to know about Flexbox. It's a really great tool, really recommend it. But essentially, a Flexbox is just allowing you to design to have flexible and dynamic sizing and position styling. It also gives us really, really great features like this justify content center. So instead of doing some really weird HTML and setting an X and Y axis offset, we can just justify our content to the center. So it's really, really convenient in that way. And then you can see that we've added another 20 pixel padding. So if I go ahead and save this, and I go back to our index to be able to run it, notice that this was for title container, and that selector is a dot, so it's talking about a class. And that is pointing to this class title container. So the styling will be applied to this div element where our image and title are. So let's go ahead and run that. And notice how it moved it all to the center. And if we inspect, I can see this green part here is the padding. So that's that 20 pixel padding we added. So kind of with that, we're going to add a little bit of web page styling. So copy this section here and go ahead and add it right after our title container in style.css. All that we're saying here is that we're going to set the background color to this color, which is the official Charger blue. When we say color here, it's referring to the font color, and we've set it to white. And notice you can put in this hex code. Sometimes it'll let you put in actual text for common color names, or you can put in this RGB 3 number values. And then again, another padding of 20 pixels. So we'll save that. We'll go back to our index.html, and this is pointing to our main container. So we're actually applying this styling to everything in body. So this is going to take precedence over our title container. So now we can see that the background is blue, our font color is white, and we still have our image. And if we inspect, we can kind of see that this 20 pixel padding got applied to everything before going over to this title container. So this title container's 20 pixels got added after inside of this 20 pixels. And that's everything we're going to do with these two sections. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our main content structure. So these two sections we're going to be copying over are going to set the style of just how our web page looks. So if I go ahead and run this again, we can see it's empty down here, but what we're going to aim for is to have this left section as one column that has all of the inputs. So it lets you put in the number of credits you're taking in each college, whether or not you're an honors college, if you're a resident or non-resident, everything like that. We're going to put it on this left-hand column. And then on the right-hand column, we're going to put like a little receipt almost with a table of each of the costs for that you're paying in fees for each college, the cost for in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition, and any other fees that we are calculating from our inputs. So we're going to try and make one row here that has two columns. So we're going to go ahead and copy this content row, and this is in our HTML. So underneath this paragraph tag, put some space and paste. So we made this div with a class of row style, and we're going to apply a row style to it in a minute. And inside we've got a form with a class of column style and a div with a column style. So this is kind of our one row that we're saying, and each one of these are going to be one column. And notice how here we had a div. This is going to show up on the right side because it's coming after it. And it's going to print its elements from left to right in HTML. But notice here we have a div, so it's going to be just a container for elements where we put all of the values that are calculated. But then here we have a form. And the only reason we're putting a form is because we're going to put input elements here, like number inputs, radio inputs, everything like that. And it doesn't give us much benefit necessarily as a developer, but you're going to see that it's going to be really helpful for other people using the site. It makes it more semantic, meaning that like something like a screen reader or a web scraper is going to see, oh, this section is a form, so it's going to know how to handle that better versus just having a bunch of divs where it's kind of vague like what all is going on inside. So the form itself doesn't look any different necessarily, but for the sake of understanding the code, it's going to make more sense. So now that we've got that, we're going to copy the styling for those rows and columns. So notice here we said row style. We're going to apply this styling, which is just to make it a flex box. And then for each of the column style, these rules are going to be applied to each one. And here we're saying flex 50%, meaning that it will take up 50% of the width of the page. So 50% here and 50% here. And then we've added a padding of 5%, which is just going to give some space in between. Let's go ahead and copy, put that in our style.css, save that, go back to our index, and then we're going to run it from here again. And you can't see anything right now, but if I inspect and I use that element selector, we can kind of see these two boxes show up. This is a div with column style and a form with column style. So these are the two columns that we've made just now, and they're going to fill up here as we put elements. Now we've done some of the main structure. We have two main sections first. We're going to put all of the inputs on that left column, and then we're just going to put the calculations table on the right column. So one of the things we're going to do first is look a little bit about Bootstrap, because all of our inputs that we're going to be using are going to be Bootstrap elements, meaning that they're HTML elements, just like this button is an HTML element, but we're going to be applying some styles from this CSS library. So this company has already made all of the CSS styling for these elements, and we're going to use that, which is why we have those imports that we had at the beginning. So go ahead and click on this link to Bootstrap, and notice it brings you down to this outline buttons. So I already linked it to the exact button we're going to use. And you can see like it gives you like these options to look at, oh, I want to use like maybe this color, things like that. There's some other kinds of buttons you can try as well. But for the sake of this one, we're going to go with the light one. And notice here it's giving the code for it. So it's just giving a normal HTML button with type button. But the most important here is the class. So kind of like how we were applying styles to elements with a specific class, like how we had title container and main container in row style, column style, Bootstrap already has these classes defined in its own files. So what we're doing here when we say class button, button outline light, is we're telling our code, hey, go to Bootstrap, the import that we put, and find the rule for this class. Kind of like how our style.css, we said, hey, this is the link to our style.css, go to this rule for this class and put any of that styling here. So we can go ahead and just copy this line and then go inside of the form. So this one's not already open, so I'm going to put some space. We're going to work right now all in the form section. Go ahead and paste that at the bottom because our submit button is actually going to be at the bottom. And let's just change the content of the button, the text, to say submit. So we'll go ahead and save that and run it. And notice we have this submit button, and it doesn't look like the button we had shown earlier. This like looks nice and it's got this cool styling. That's all the styling that Bootstrap has already made. And all we have to do is put the right class to reference, hey, I want the styling that is in this class. And that's what this web page has. It's giving all of these different elements and how to get the styling. So if you want this card styling, you would reference this class name. And you can see that I already put the actual Bootstrap element here, so you're welcome to just copy it from here as well. So you're going to see that in all of these following sections, there's a lot of like a div and then a span inside, and a span is just another section element. You're going to see a lot of stuff here that's already filled out, and that a lot of it comes from Bootstrap. So if I were to go back to Bootstrap and say I wanted maybe an input group, and it's already built something like this, you could just go ahead and copy all of this and paste it into your page and edit whatever needs to be edited to fit your needs. And you're going to see that a lot in web development is a lot of tools have been created already and you just need to import it or reference it in your code to fit your needs. Kind of like how libraries exist for Python, like NumPy, they've already made those functions and you import the library and reference it to be able to use it. You don't go ahead and recreate those functions. So just keep that in mind. A lot of this is coming from Bootstrap. It's already been defined as this is how you can properly reference the styling. So all of these inputs we're going to go here, we're going to go from top to bottom, and they're going to come one after the other in our index.html, but they're going to come above our submit button, so keep that in mind. So the first one is a radio button. So go ahead and copy it. And essentially a radio button is like a multiple choice type of button. And this is going to have some input with type radio. That's our element. And you can see that's here. Oops, I highlighted too much. All the way here. And you're also going to notice it has a matching label. So there's going to be a lot of combos of input with a label that we're going to be using in the next few sections. And all that's saying is that we have some sort of input. So like this one's a radio button. It's just that little circle, but we want some text to go with it. And that's going to come from our label. And you'll notice here we have an ID of resident radio, which I've already set for us. I've already set a lot of the IDs and class names in here for us. Just go with it. We will talk about it more in the JavaScript workshop. But notice we have this ID of resident radio, and then we have a for attribute in the label that's also resident radio. And what we're saying is that this label is for the element that has resident radio as its ID. So this is how we kind of link them together so that they know that they're talking about each other. And we can give it this value attribute, which is not going to show up when we put it in our HTML, but it is just a value that is assigned to this element, and we can use it in JavaScript later. So that's what this section is, and this is just going to be repeated again. We're going to have a resident button and a non-resident button so that you can toggle between the two. So go ahead, I'm above the button. We're going to go and paste all of these now from top to bottom, so leave that button at the bottom. So I'm going to put that in, save, and run. And here I've got that styled button. And notice if I click the text, because it's a label for this button, it knows that when I click on it, that I'm talking about this button. So that's our first input. So you can go ahead and close this, and we're going to go ahead underneath it, and that's where we're going to paste our next input. And that's going to be our number inputs. So this is a little long, but this is just multiple number inputs. And you're going to see again, there's another label and input combo. So we have the label, and then the input. And here we are labeling for the College of Arts, Humanities, Social Science credits, and we have it for College of Business, Education, so on. And we're just saying that these are how many credits are you taking within each college. So we want it to have as some number kind of input. So we're going to see input, but this time with type number. Some of the special attributes that you're going to see here are a value, which we've set to 0 for all of these because we want the default value, which is what it is, to be 0. And then we can have a min and max value. So we can set it as minimum 0, maximum 18. So once we copy all of this section and paste it, and go ahead and save and run, we get all of these number inputs. And I can't make it go down below into the negatives. And once I get up to 18, it's going to stop there. But notice if I type it, it's going to let me put 2000 or negative 2000. Something like this, where you're typing it in, is going to require some input validation that you're going to have to do with JavaScript. So we're not going to worry about it for the sake of this project for simplicity, but just keep that in mind. This is what we can do within the scope of the HTML. And another thing that I mentioned that I forgot to mention for the radio buttons, but here we've got these special attributes where we have class equals something, value equals something. In the case of these radio buttons, notice how we had this checked here with no equals. What we call that is a Boolean attribute, which just means that when it's applied in there, it means that it's set to true. And if we don't put checked, like how we didn't put checked for the non-resident, then it's automatically going to be false. So we don't have to put equals true or equals false on here. And in this case, when we put checked, it just means that it checks it automatically. So when we run this code, it automatically checked resident. But if we had put checked on non-resident, it would have selected that instead. So we're going to go back. We finished this number input and move on to the next section, which is our select input. So go ahead and copy this and then close this div that had all of our number inputs. We're going to go underneath it and paste. So notice here that this is not going to be an input tag this time. We still have a label, and the 4 matches the ID, but this is for a select element, which is still pretty self-explanatory. We have a select element with all of these options, and we create all of the options for this like drop-down select. And you can see here we have this selected, which is another Boolean attribute, which means that we're saying this first option is going to be selected by default. HTML might already select the first one by default, so if we had put selected down here, we would have really seen a difference. We're going to see this value attribute again for each option, but notice how this value is not what's going to show up on the web page. It's actually going to be this inner text. This value here is what's going to be used for the JavaScript. So don't worry about putting that whole option inside of value. This is just for our sake as a programmer. But this text is what's going to actually show up in the input. So if we save this and run, now we have that drop down. We're going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to go underneath it for our next section, which is the checkbox input. So go ahead and copy this section. And again, we have another input, but this time of type checkbox. And here we're doing it for the honors college and for a parking permit. So whether or not you have a parking permit or whether or not you're in the honors college. In this case, you could also put this checked Boolean attribute again, and it would by default select it would select the options. These two are not linked to each other. They're just a checkbox on their own. But in this case, we're not going to, just because we don't want to do that by default for the sake of the calculator. But notice the input here still matches, the ID matches with the 4 label here. So copy this section, and we're going to paste it. Save and run. And now we've got these two checkboxes. So we can check them, but by default they're not selected. And that's going to be it for our inputs. So we're pretty much towards the end. Just one more section is our calculations table. So back on our page, we're going to close this form because we're not doing any more inputs. And we're going to go to this other column where we're putting all of the done data, the calculations. So go ahead, this is a really big code chunk, and it's just one big table. So just some of the basic structure, we have a table element. Ignore the class table, that is for Bootstrap. But this is just saying, hey, everything inside of this tag, all the way down to the very bottom, is within our table. So we have a T head section, which is our header, and then T body, which this one goes all the way down to the rest of it. And in our table head, we have TR, which is a row, and we see the same thing in body. We have these rows, that's how we define it. And specifically within the T head, we have a TH to describe what is this header for this column. So we have rows defined, and within each row we have these columns. So here we've got a description and an amount column. And that's like our titles for the columns. Then when we go inside of T body, we have multiple table rows and we have table data. So this table data matches to this column for the description, and this table data is matching to the amount. And notice these all have IDs. That's going to be for JavaScript later when we're going to put actual values that we calculated. And we're going to set these all to $0 by default as the actual text. So just make sure that you copy this and paste that inside of our div. We're going to save and run. And this pastes that big table. And we can see we've got the description column and the amount column. And then our very last section is pretty much self-explanatory since we've already covered all of these elements. This is just a little div with a little bit of Bootstrap styling, and we have an H5 element. So this is much smaller than the big title that we have, but it's still a little bit bigger than our paragraph element. And it's just got an ID for JavaScript purposes, and it's got these total credits set to 0. So we're just going to copy that and paste it underneath our table. Save and run. And we can just see that we have this total credits set to 0 now. And that is pretty much it for our front end for our HTML and CSS. So all of this is set up now. We have all the elements that we need to be able to do the calculations. What we're going to have to do is actually perform those calculations. So make the functions that will do the calculations, and we need to make the functions that are going to be able to know that, hey, when I click on this button, I'm changing the value, that this is not a resident, it's a non-resident. Or when we put 5 credits of arts humanities or 3 engineering credits, honors college and parking permit. All of those calculations we're going to do in the JavaScript. And then our submit button has to actually do something. And once we do those calculations, we need to put it in this table. So that's going to be in our next workshop. So make sure that you come out to that JavaScript workshop. And that will also be recorded if you're not able to attend. And you will be able to look at it for reference at a later time if you want to walk through it a second time. But that is all of our front end. Definitely go through this one more time if that was something that you didn't understand that you want to go back and look at. Feel free to go through, pause it as you go, so that you can follow along and be able to process each section. And if you have any questions about it, definitely use the resources that I linked on the resources section here. And if you still can't find anything within here or on Google, then drop a question in the 1 month discussion channel that's what it's for, so that we can help you out, and maybe someone else who's also working on 1 month can help you out if they've also run into an issue. So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this, and I look forward to working on JavaScript and finishing up this project with you guys. So thanks for watching.